He called her his plain, simple wife, while he flaunted his dazzling mistress at the most exclusive parties in New York. Arthur Vance believed he was the king of a financial empire he'd built from scratch. He boasted that his mistress's beauty was his real dividend, his ultimate acquisition. He loved to tell his friends how she was a masterpiece of nature, while his wife was merely comfortable. He had no idea his wife, Elara, wasn't just part of his empire. She owned it, from the glittering logo on the skyscraper to the last byte of code in its servers, and the man who thought he had everything was about to learn he had nothing at all. The chandeliers at the Metropolitan Museum of Art dripped light, scattering diamonds across the shoulders of New York's elite. Arthur Vance stood at the center of the grand hall, a glass of champagne in one hand, the other gesturing expansively. He was a handsome man, with a thick mane of silvering hair and a jawline that photographers loved. He was the public face, the charismatic visionary, the CEO of Vance Holdings, an empire that seemed to touch everything from next-gen technology to high-stakes real estate. "The key to the new quarter is aggressive expansion," Arthur boomed, his voice resonating with a self-assuredness that colleagues mistook for genius. "We're not just building buildings, we're sculpting the skyline. We're not just writing code, we're architecting the future." A few feet away, blending into the priceless tapestries, stood his wife, Elara Vance. She was, in a word, understated. While other women wore cascades of jewels and gowns in defiant, vibrant colors, Elara wore a simple, perfectly tailored navy silk dress. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her only jewelry was her plain wedding band and a pair of simple diamond studs. She held a glass of water, her gaze analytical. She wasn't just observing the party, she was processing it. She watched Arthur charm a gullible young tech reporter, feeding him pre-approved sound bites. She saw him clap the shoulder of a rival CEO, a gesture that was half friendly, half territorial. To most, Elara was Arthur's quiet wife, a shy, bookish woman who supported her brilliant husband from the shadows. They assumed she was lucky, a simple woman who had married a financial titan. A true titan, Silas Croft, a man whose old money wealth dwarfed even Arthur's perceived fortune, bypassed the crowd and made his way directly to Elara. He ignored Arthur completely. "Elara," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. "Your play on the lithium futures last week was inspired. You cornered the market before anyone even knew there was a corner." Elara offered a small, polite smile. "Silas, I'm glad it worked out. The projections on EV battery demands were too conservative, in my opinion." "In your opinion," Silas chuckled, "is usually where the smart money is. How you manage to do what you do while managing all of this." He gestured vaguely toward Arthur, who was now laughing too loudly at his own joke. "Arthur enjoys the public-facing side of the business," Elara said diplomatically. "It's a necessary part of the brand." "Excuse me, Silas." She moved away, her eyes scanning the room. She wasn't just Arthur's wife. She was the architect. She wasn't just a support. She was the foundation. Vance Holdings was a name she had created, a public-facing entity designed to operate the vast, complex web of private assets and technological patents held by her actual company, a quiet, unlisted entity named EH Capital. Arthur was not her partner. He was her first and most elaborate employee. He was the CEO, yes, but she was the chairman, the board, and the sole stockholder. Their Upper East Side townhouse wasn't just a home, it was her fortress. While Arthur used the sprawling, mahogany-paneled library for his interviews, Elara's real office was 3 floors below ground, in a secure, soundproofed bunker, accessed by a biometric scanner hidden behind a 19th century bookcase. It was a room that would have made an intelligence agency proud. Later that night, Arthur stumbled into their bedroom, smelling of scotch and self-congratulation. "Ilara, you should have seen me. I had Robert Miller from the Journal eating out of my hand. He's running a cover story, The Vance Vision. Perfect." Ilara, already in a simple cotton nightgown, was reading a dense report on semiconductor fabrication. "That's nice, Arthur." He frowned, loosening his black tie. "Nice? It's brilliant. Sometimes I wonder if you even understand the scale of what I've built. You're content with your little charity boards and your books." He gestured dismissively. "It's a different world out here, Ilara. It's sharp. It's real." "I'm sure it is," she said, turning a page. Arthur sighed, annoyed by her lack of adoration. He pulled off his $10,000 Patek Philippe watch and tossed it onto the antique dresser. "You should try to engage more. People think you're aloof. It doesn't look good for the brand." "I'll try to be more engaging," Ilara said, her eyes never leaving the report. As Arthur went into the marble bathroom, his phone, left on the dresser, lit up. Ilara's eyes, sharp and quick, flicked to the screen. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from a private, encrypted messaging app she didn't recognize. The preview was short, but a single name was visible. "Chloe. You were magnificent tonight, my lion. I watched the live stream. Can't wait to have you all to myself tomorrow. See." Ilara's expression did not change. She didn't gasp. She didn't feel a pang of jealousy. Instead, a cold, clear calculation began to form in her mind. A lion. How predictable. Arthur was not a lion. He was a peacock, and peacocks, when they displayed their feathers too brazenly, were incredibly vulnerable. She turned the page of her report. The calculation was simple. A personal indiscretion was one thing. But if this Chloe became a liability, if Arthur's arrogance and sloppy sentimentality threatened the stability of the empire she had built, it would be a breach of contract, and Ilara Hawthorne Vance always enforced her contracts. The Core Club in Midtown Manhattan was a sanctuary for men like Arthur Vance. It was a place where billion-dollar deals were whispered over $500 glasses of Macallan 25, and the leather on the chairs was older and better treated than most of its members' marriages. It was here, 2 weeks after the gala, that Arthur's bragging began in earnest. He was holding court in a private booth with 3 other executives, men who ran divisions of other, lesser companies. They were the kind of men who fed Arthur's ego, and in return, he gave them the illusion of access to his power. "I'm telling you, Mark," Arthur said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The market is all about energy. You have to project success to be successful. It's about vitality. Your vitality seems particularly high, Arthur," chuckled one of the men, David Chen. "Saw you at the opera fundraiser." Ilara looked. Well, she looked like Ilara, always so classic. Arthur leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. Classic is one word for it. Dated is another. Ilara is a wonderful woman, you understand. A rock. Stable. But a man. A man at my level. He needs more than stability. He needs fire. He needs inspiration. He pulled out his phone. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. He tapped the screen and slid it onto the table. The men leaned in. The photo was of a young woman, perhaps 25. She was, by any conventional standard, breathtaking. She was posed on the deck of a yacht, laughing into the wind, her blonde hair a chaotic, sun-bleached halo. Her body was all long limbs and impossible curves, barely contained by a microscopic red bikini. "Gentlemen," Arthur said, his voice thick with pride. "Meet Chloe Preston." "My God, Arthur," Mark breathed, his eyes wide. "She's a work of art." "She is art," Arthur agreed, retrieving his phone and gazing at the image like a collector admiring a Picasso. "That, my friends, is my new project. She's an actress, a model. She has a spirit that's electric. When I'm with her, I feel like I'm 25 again. The ideas just flow. This new aggressive push into AI, that was all fueled by her." "But Ilara?" David asked, glancing around nervously. "Ilara is the foundation," Arthur said dismissively, waving his hand. "She's the concrete. You need concrete. But you don't look at the concrete, do you? You look at the steel and glass. You look at the design. Chloe, she's the design. She's a masterpiece." He leaned back, satisfied. "Honestly, a beautiful woman like that. She's the ultimate dividend. Better than any stock. She proves you're at the top of your game." What Arthur didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that in the booth, directly behind him, shielded by a high-backed leather partition, sat Martin Shaw. Martin was the opposite of Arthur. He was a quiet man in a nondescript grey suit, with a brilliant legal mind and an unshakable loyalty that was absolute. He was the chief counsel for Ieta Capital and Ilara's right hand. He had been with her since she wrote the first lines of the predictive algorithm that had made her first billion, long before Arthur Vance was hired to be the face of the operation. Martin hadn't been eavesdropping. He was meeting a regulator for a quiet dinner. But he had recognized Arthur's booming, self-important voice instantly. He had sat in silence, his $30 steak tasting like ash, and listened to the entire pathetic boast. He heard his boss, the most formidable intellect he had ever known, referred to as concrete. He didn't need to make a recording. His memory was eidetic. As Arthur and his friends ordered another round, laughing about Chloe's fire, Martin quietly paid his bill and left. He walked the 10 blocks to the Upper East Side townhouse. He didn't use the main entrance. He used a discreet side door, taking a private elevator directly down to the secure sub-level. Ilara was where he expected her to be, standing before a wall of monitors displaying real-time global market data. The room, her real office, was known only as the core. It was silent, climate-controlled, and shielded from any form of electronic surveillance. "He's becoming a problem," Martin said, without preamble. Ilara turned. Her face was calm, illuminated by the blue and green glow of the data streams. "Define problem, Martin." "He's not just indiscreet. He's actively compromising security. He's at the core club, showing photographs of his mistress to competitors." "Competitors?" Ilara asked, her voice sharp. "Mark Fredericks from Quantum Leap and David Chen from Apex. He's bragging. He called her his dividend. He called you concrete." Ilara absorbed this. There was no flicker of hurt, only a faint, dangerous narrowing of her eyes. Concrete. An interesting choice of words. Concrete is what stops a speeding bullet. It's what a building's entire weight rests upon. It is, by its nature, unglamorous and absolutely essential. "He's using the company jet," Martin continued. "He flew her to St. Bart's last weekend. I have the flight logs. He's listing her as a logistics consultant on the expense reports. That's not just indiscretion, Ilara. That's fraud." Ilara turned back to the screen. She watched the flow of capital across the globe. She was moving hundreds of millions of dollars with a few keystrokes, all while the man who bore her name was upstairs, sleeping soundly, dreaming of his masterpiece. "He is confusing the perks of his employment with power," Ilara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He's forgotten he's an employee. He's starting to believe the brand." "What are your orders?" Martin asked. For now, nothing. We observe. We gather data. He's breached the morality clause of his contract, but that's a simple firing. What he's doing with the jet, that's a criminal breach. He's handing us the tools to dismantle him. Let him continue. I want to see exactly how deep his arrogance goes. She typed a few commands into her terminal. I'm freezing his access to the non-designated liquidity funds. He'll still have his salary and operating budget, but any special project capital will now require my personal, explicit sign-off. Let's see what our lion does when his spending allowance gets tightened. He'll be furious, Martin noted. Yes, Ilara said, a very faint, cold smile touching her lips. And a furious, arrogant man makes even more mistakes. Let him brag. Let him show her off. He's building his own cage, one boast at a time. The first crack appeared not as a tremor, but as a declined transaction. Arthur was at Le Bernardin, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, for lunch with Chloe. This was a bold, foolish move. It was one thing to meet at a private club. It was another to parade his mistress in a 3 Michelin-star establishment frequented by the city's power brokers. But Chloe had insisted. Arthur, darling, if I'm your inspiration, I can't be kept in a box. She'd purred in his penthouse apartment, a property leased by Vance Holdings as a corporate retreat. I want to be seen with you. I want people to know who I am. Arthur, blinded by her beauty and his own ego, had agreed. He'd booked the best table under his own name. The lunch was a performance. Chloe, in a searingly red dress that left little to the imagination, laughed too loudly, touched his arm too often, and talked endlessly about the movie roles she deserved. Arthur, meanwhile, was scanning the room, nodding at acquaintances, relishing the blend of envy and shock he saw on their faces. He was making a statement. Look at what I have. Look at what I can do. The bill arrived. $1,800. Arthur handed the waiter his personal black card, the one linked to his discretionary fund at the company, the very fund Ilara had frozen. The waiter returned, his expression pained. My apologies, Mr. Vane. The card has been declined. Arthur's smile froze. What? That's impossible. Run it again. I have, sir. 3 times. It seems there is an issue with the bank. Chloe's perfectly arched eyebrow rose. An issue? Arthur, what's going on? It's nothing, Arthur snapped, his face reddening. A systems error. He fumbled for another card, his primary corporate Amex. This one, linked to his salary, went through. But the damage was done. The embarrassment was a physical, stinging heat on his neck. He stormed into Vance Tower an hour later, bypassing his secretary. Ilara! He shouted, bursting into the sprawling ceremonial office she kept on the 50th floor, the one she rarely used, preferring the core. She was there, as if expecting him, calmly reviewing a stack of quarterly reports. Arthur, you're back early. How was your lunch? You froze my account, he accused, slamming his hand on her desk. My personal fund. How dare you, without consulting me? Ilara looked up, her expression unreadable. It's not your fund, Arthur. It's a corporate liquidity fund for emergency capital allocation. I am restructuring our liquid assets in preparation for the Q4 acquisition. All non-essential funds are being consolidated. It's a simple administrative move. Administrative? He sputtered. I was humiliated in front of a client. A client? Ilara repeated, her voice dangerously soft. Chloe Preston, logistics consultant, an aspiring actress with $80,000 in credit card debt and no college degree. Is that the client you were entertaining? Arthur stopped, his blood running cold. How do you know that name? Ilara picked up a sleek, black file from her desk and slid it across the polished mahogany. Arthur opened it. His face went white. It was a complete dossier. Flight logs for the Gulf Stream, G650 to St. Bart's. Receipts from Cartier and Chanel, all billed to his corporate expense account. Detailed wire transfers from the discretionary fund to a private account under Chloe's name. And, most damningly, a transcript of his conversation at the Core Club. You're spying on me," he whispered, horrified. "I am auditing you," Elara corrected, her voice as sharp and cold as ice. "You are an employee, Arthur. You are the CEO of my company, and you are using company assets to fund your affair. You are committing fraud. You are exposing this entire organization to liability." Arthur stared at the pages, his mind reeling. He wasn't afraid. He was furious. He was being treated like a subordinate, like a child. All his self-perception as the lion and the visionary was being challenged by this accountant who happened to be his wife. "How dare you?" he finally said, his voice low and trembling with rage. "I built this. This company is nothing without my name, my face, my connections. You sit in your office and play with numbers, while I am out there making the deals. I am the asset, Elara. Me! You are a brand, Arthur. A brand I created and funded. We'll see about that," he snarled. He was backed into a corner, and his ego had only one way out. Attack. "You think you can control me with this? You think you can lock me out?" He grabbed the file. This is nothing. This is a domestic dispute. But I'm talking about business. The board respects me. The board listens to me. Maybe it's time for a change in leadership. Maybe the board needs to be reminded who actually runs this company. Elara watched him, her expression unchanging. "The board? Yes, the board," he shouted. "You're a passive shareholder, Elara. A founder, yes, but you've been hands-off for years. They'll see this for what it is, a spiteful wife trying to punish her husband. You've forgotten who you're married to. I am Vance Holdings." He stormed out of the office, clutching the dossier. He was no longer just an arrogant husband. He was a wounded animal. He didn't go home. He went straight to Chloe's apartment. "She knows," he said, pacing the white minimalist living room. "She knows everything." Chloe, who had been painting her nails, looked up with mild interest. "So? What does that mean? Are you cutting me off?" "No, it means I'm taking over, fully. I'm done letting her hide in the shadows and pull the strings. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. I'm going to have her removed." Chloe's eyes lit up. This was better than she'd hoped. "Removed? You can do that?" "I'm the CEO. She's just a board member with a large stake. The rest of the board is loyal to me. I'll frame it as a necessary restructuring. I'll tell them she's unstable, that she's letting a personal issue cloud her business judgment, that she's become a risk." He looked at Chloe, his eyes wild with a new, dangerous idea. "And when I've consolidated control, I'm going to give you a real position." "Oh, yes. Vice President of Brand Development, a 7-figure salary, a seat at the table. How does that sound?" Chloe smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. She stood up and wrapped her arms around his neck. "That," she purred, "sounds like you're finally becoming the king I always knew you were. Destroy her, Arthur. Take it all." Arthur kissed her, his mind already drafting his speech. He was going to wipe that smug, calm look off Elara's face forever. He was going to take his empire. He had no idea he was walking, willingly, into his own execution. The call for the emergency board meeting went out at 9:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. The stated purpose? Urgent discussion on corporate governance and a proposed strategic restructuring of the executive board. Arthur felt a surge of adrenaline he hadn't felt in years. This was better than any deal. This was a coup. He spent the morning with his personal lawyer, a man who, tellingly, specialized in high-conflict divorce, not corporate law. Together, they drafted the motion. It was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. It cited Ilara's increasing disengagement from public-facing duties and recent erratic financial interventions as a clear and present risk to shareholder confidence. It called for her immediate removal from the board of directors, pending a full psychological and fiduciary review. To replace her, he proposed a special consultant to the CEO's office, with full board voting rights, Ms. Chloe Preston, whose fresh perspective and expertise in modern branding and market synergy would re-energize the Vance Holdings image. He was so insulated by his own arrogance that he didn't find it strange that Ilara accepted the meeting summons without a single phone call or question. He mistook her silence for fear. At 3:00 p.m., the board members assembled in the main conference room on the 60th floor. It was a room designed to intimidate, with a 40-foot black marble table and a panoramic view of Central Park. The 6 board members, 5 men and 1 woman, were people Arthur had personally courted over the years. They were executives from other industries, academics, and retired politicians. They owed their generous board stipends and stock options, in their minds, to Arthur. Arthur took his place at the head of the table. Ilara sat at the opposite end, flanked by her chief counsel, Martin Shaw, who was quietly setting up a laptop. Arthur noted this with a smirk. She brought her lawyer. How weak, how typical. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Arthur began, his voice exuding calm, concerned authority. "I have called this meeting because we are facing an internal crisis, a crisis of leadership that threatens the very stability of the company I have built." He paced, his image reflected in the glass. "For years, my wife, Ilara, has been a valued member of this board. Her legacy as a founder is secure. However, in recent months, her behavior has become erratic. She has begun to interfere in day-to-day operations, freezing critical capital funds without consultation, and acting not as a partner, but as a disruptor." The board members shifted uneasily. They looked from Arthur to Ilara. Ilara simply watched Arthur, her hands folded neatly on the table. "I have discovered," Arthur continued, "that this behavior is rooted not in business strategy, but in a personal, domestic matter." He tossed the dossier Ilara had given him onto the table. "She has been conducting surveillance on me. She has assembled this pathetic file in a misguided attempt to, what? Control me? This is behavior unbecoming of a board member. It is unstable. A few board members glanced at the file, but none dared touch it. We cannot allow personal vendettas to jeopardize our fiduciary duty," Arthur declared, hitting his crescendo. "Vance Holdings needs strong, decisive, forward-looking leadership, which is why I am proposing 2 motions. First, a vote of no confidence in Ilara Vance, removing her from the board of directors, effective immediately." He paused, letting the shock settle. "Second, to fill the new strategic vacuum, I propose we appoint a special consultant to the CEO with full board privileges, a woman whose dynamic energy and insight into the modern market will be invaluable. I nominate Ms. Chloe Preston." A stunned silence filled the room. Even the board members loyal to Arthur looked bewildered. They knew who Chloe Preston was. Her picture was all over the gossip pages, linked with Arthur. This wasn't a business move. It was a brazen, reckless power play. "Arthur, this is highly irregular," said one member, General Peterson, a retired military man. "To remove a founder based on instability," Arthur cut him off. "We need new blood. We need to look forward. I am staking my leadership on this. It is either her or me. Do you stand with the woman who is trying to burn the company down over a personal spat, or with the man who guides it to new heights every single quarter? I call for a vote. He had them. He knew he did. They were weak. They would follow the strength, and he was the only one showing it. A vote will be necessary, a quiet voice said. Ilara stood up. She was not angry. She was not crying. She looked, Arthur thought, almost bored. Thank you, Arthur. That was illuminating. She nodded to Martin Shaw. Martin pressed a key on his laptop. The massive screen at the end of the room, usually reserved for market projections, flickered to life. It didn't show charts. It showed a simple, organizational diagram. Before we vote, Ilara said, her voice cutting through the silence, I feel it is my duty to clarify for the board exactly what it is they do. Arthur frowned. What are you talking about? We're the board of Vance Holdings. No, you're not, Ilara said simply. The diagram on the screen was a pyramid. At the very top, in a single, bold box, were the words E.H. Capital, LLC. Sole shareholder, Ilara Hawthorne. An arrow pointed down from that box to another, smaller box, Hawthorne Strategic Solutions, Inc., 100% owned by E.H. Capital. From that box, a dozen arrows splintered out to various other entities, trusts, patent holding companies, real estate shell corporations. And at the very bottom, the smallest box of all, was Vance Holdings, LLC. Vance Holdings, Ilara explained, as if to a classroom of slow children, is an operating subsidiary. It is a service company. It is the public-facing brand I created 15 years ago because I had no interest in being on the cover of magazines. This entity, Vance Holdings, LLC, does not own our technology. It does not own our patents. It does not own our real estate portfolio, our server farms, or our $80 billion in liquid assets. It doesn't even own this building. It leases this floor. The board members stared, their faces draining of color. Ilara continued. Hawthorne Strategic Solutions owns all of it, and E.H. Capital owns Hawthorne Strategic Solutions. And I own E.H. Capital, 100%. I am the shareholder. I am the entire voting bloc. She looked at the bewildered faces of the board. You, she said, gesturing to them, are not the board of directors for an empire. You are the advisory board for a single LLC. A board I appointed, and a board I can and will dissolve. Your stipends are a line item on my expense sheet. She then turned her cool, analytical gaze on the man who was still standing at the head of the table, his mouth slightly open, his face a mask of disbelief. And you, Arthur, you are not the king. You are not the visionary. You are an employee. Martin Shaw stepped forward and placed a single, blue-sheathed document in front of Arthur. You are the CEO for hire of Vance Holdings, LLC, Ilara stated. You are on a very, very generous contract, a contract which you have, just in spectacular fashion, breached. Section 4, Fiduciary Duty. Section 5, Misuse of Corporate Assets. Section 7, Morality and Public Comportment. And as of 5 minutes ago, Section 9, Attempted Corporate Malfeasance. This is, Arthur stammered, this is a lie, a trick. It's not a trick, Arthur, Ilara said. It's the paperwork. The paperwork you were clearly too important and too visionary to ever read. She walked the length of the table until she was standing directly in front of him. You are fired. Effective immediately. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Your access to all company property is revoked. The lease on your corporate retreat, penthouse, is terminated. The car that is waiting for you downstairs is no longer yours. You will be escorted from this building by security. She looked at him, and for the first time, Arthur saw what Silas Croft and the other real Titans saw. Not a plain, simple wife. He saw a queen. He saw an empress. He saw the ice-cold, terrifyingly brilliant architect of his entire life. "You boasted about your mistress's beauty," Elara said, her voice a devastating whisper. "You called her your dividend. You called me concrete. You were right about one thing, Arthur. I am the concrete. I am the foundation. And you are just a rather tacky, poorly designed statue that I have decided to remove." "You can't do this!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "I just did!" Elara looked past him to the two uniformed security guards who had entered the room at Martin's signal. "Gentlemen, Mr. Vance is no longer an employee. Please see him out. He is not to take anything but his personal photographs." Arthur stared at her, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "Elara, you will regret this. I will destroy you. I will tell the world." "Tell them what?" Elara asked, turning away. "That you were a figurehead? That you were a glorified spokesman who committed fraud to impress a call girl? Go ahead. I own the PR firms too." The guards took Arthur's arms. He was, for the first time in his life, utterly and completely speechless. He, the lion, was being dragged out of his own jungle, and he couldn't even manage a roar. The silence that followed Arthur's removal was heavier and more absolute than the black marble of the table. The boardroom, which minutes before had been the stage for Arthur's attempted coup, now felt like a tomb. The remaining board members sat frozen, like statues themselves, their eyes fixed on Elara. General Peterson was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. "Mrs. Vance, Ms. Hawthorne, I had no idea." Elara, who had returned to her seat at the end of the table, looked at him. Her gaze was not triumphant. It was assessing. "That," she said, "is precisely the problem. You were paid six-figure stipends to advise the CEO of a major corporation, and in 15 years, not one of you ever performed basic due diligence on the corporate structure you were supposedly governing. You never asked who owned the patents. You never questioned why all capital expenditures flowed from a parent entity and not to one. You just cashed your checks and accepted Arthur's invitations to his golf tournaments." She let the indictment hang in the air. "You weren't a board. You were an audience. And Arthur loved an audience." "Elara, please," said Sarah Jenkins, the academic on the board. "We were loyal to the brand. We were loyal to you and Arthur." "You were loyal to Arthur's charisma," Elara corrected, "and the perks that came with it. That loyalty was just tested. And every single one of you sat there, in silence, while he attempted to oust the founder of the company based on a personal spat and install his mistress. The only reason you are not all unemployed, along with him, is that your cowardice was ultimately irrelevant." She closed the file in front of her. "This advisory board is dissolved, effective immediately. Your services are no longer required. Mr. Shaw has your severance agreements, which are, frankly, far more generous than you deserve. They are, of course, contingent on the signing of a comprehensive, lifetime, non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak of Vance Holdings, Edor H. Capital, or anything you witnessed here today. Am I understood?" They nodded, pale and shaken. One by one, they signed the papers Martin provided, collected their belongings, and filed out of the room, avoiding her eyes. They had walked in as powerful directors and were walking out as disgraced, overpaid spectators. When the room was empty, Martin Shaw finally allowed himself a small, tight smile. "That was efficient, Elara." "It was overdue," Elara said, standing and walking to the vast window. She looked down at Park Avenue, 60 floors below. He forced my hand. I would have let him continue as the face of the company indefinitely, had he simply been a competent, discreet employee. But his ego became a liability. A 25-year-old actress was not going to be the iceberg that sank my ship. "What about Miss Preston?" Martin asked. "She is, at this moment, likely waiting for a phone call from Arthur, expecting to be crowned a vice president." "Miss Preston," Ilara said, "will find the lease on her apartment terminated by the end of the day. The locks will be changed by 6 p.m. She can retrieve her personal belongings from a storage unit in Queens once she settles her outstanding bill with Hawthorne Strategic Solutions for the consulting fees she was illegally paid." "She won't be able to pay it," Martin noted. "I know, but the bill will follow her, as will the credit agencies." Ilara had no malice for Chloe. To her, the woman was just a bad variable, a rounding error that had been corrected. "And Arthur?" Ilara's expression hardened. "He has breached his contract. He owes the company $4.8 million for the unauthorized use of the jet, the fraudulent expense reports, and the funds he wired to Ms. Preston. His severance is void. His company-funded pension is void. All his stock options were tied to Vance Holdings, LLC, the service company, which, as of this meeting, has a net worth of 0. It will be declared bankrupt by tomorrow, and its assets, the desks, the computers, the brand name Vance, will be absorbed by Hawthorne Solutions for pennies on the dollar." She turned from the window. "He's not just fired, Martin. He's ruined. He has his name, the clothes on his back, and a personal bank account with whatever was left of his last salary payment. He thought I was the concrete. He's about to find out what it's like to hit it at terminal velocity." Her phone buzzed. It was the head of her personal security. "Ms. Hawthorne, Mr. Vance is out of the building. He attempted to use his corporate car. When the driver refused him entry, he became agitated. He's on the sidewalk now, attempting to hail a cab." "Thank you, Robert. Let him go. He is no longer our concern." She hung up. The first phase was over. The tumor had been excised. Now it was time for the company to heal and to reintroduce itself to the world. "Martin," she said, "call the Wall Street Journal, schedule an interview for tomorrow morning, and get the PR team in here. We're changing the name of the building. Vance Tower is far too gaudy. From now on, it's the Hawthorne Building." She picked up her briefcase, a simple, worn leather satchel that held more power than Arthur's entire flashy existence. "And Martin, order a new nameplate for the CEO's office. Mine." Arthur Vance stood on the curb of Park Avenue, the wind whipping his expensive, unbuttoned suit jacket. The uniformed doorman of his building, a man he'd tipped $500 every Christmas, was studiously avoiding his gaze. The long, black Rolls-Royce that had been his car was pulling away from the curb, empty. "You can't do this!" he shouted at the driver. But his voice was lost in the din of traffic. He was trembling, a mixture of pure, unadulterated rage and a new, unfamiliar sensation. Raw panic. His phone. He had to call his lawyer. He pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was black. "Dead," he muttered. He held the power button. Nothing. He didn't know that Martin Shaw had triggered a remote poison pill protocol. The second his termination was official, his phone, his laptop, and his tablet were all remotely wiped and bricked. All his contacts, all his power had vanished. He fumbled in his pocket for his wallet. He had his personal credit cards, but the humiliation at Le Bernardin flashed in his mind. He was afraid to use them. He had a few $100s in cash. He felt a wave of nausea. He, Arthur Vance, was counting cash on a sidewalk. He flagged down a yellow cab, the first he'd taken in 2 decades. "Where to, buddy?" the driver grunted. Arthur gave the address for Chloe's penthouse. Chloe. She would know what to do. She would comfort him. They would fight this together. She was his fire. They would burn Ilara to the ground. He paid the driver, a $28 fare that felt like a physical blow, and ran into the gleaming lobby. "Arthur Vance for Miss Preston," he snapped at the concierge. The concierge, a man who usually fawned over him, didn't smile. He typed something into his computer. "I'm sorry, sir. Ms. Preston's lease was terminated an hour ago. She's not a resident." "What? That's absurd! I pay for that lease. Let me up!" he yelled, pushing for the elevator. "Sir, I can't do that." Just then, the elevator doors opened, and Chloe herself walked out, dragging 2 oversized Louis Vuitton suitcases. She was followed by a porter hauling 3 more. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, her face a mask of cold fury. "Chloe!" Arthur cried, a wave of relief washing over him. "Thank God! Did you hear what that witch did?" Chloe didn't stop. She marched right past him, toward the front door, where a black Escalade was waiting. "Chloe, where are you going?" Arthur said, grabbing her arm. She ripped her arm away, her sunglasses falling off. Her eyes were not filled with love or concern. They were reptilian. "Get your hands off me, Arthur." "What? What are you talking about? It's me. We have to fight her. She's locked me out. She fired me." "She fired you," Chloe spat, her voice a low, vicious snarl. "Not me. You are fired. You are locked out. I just got a call from her lawyer. My lease is gone. My consulting fee is being clawed back. They're trying to send me a bill for $300,000. We'll fight it. I'll hire the best lawyers." "With what, Arthur?" She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "With your good looks. I just checked the news wires. Bloomberg is already running the story. Arthur Vance ousted from Vance Holdings. Hawthorne Strategic Solutions assumes direct control. You're not just fired. You're nothing. You're a joke. But I did this for you," he stammered, his entire world collapsing. "Our future. You're my inspiration. Your beauty. My beauty," she said, jabbing a finger at his chest, "is an asset, and I don't tie my assets to a sinking ship. You said it yourself. I'm a masterpiece. Masterpieces belong in museums, Arthur, not in the gutter with you." "Chloe, please," he begged, the last of his pride evaporating. "Don't leave me. I have nowhere to go." "That sounds like a you problem," she said, pulling her sunglasses back on. "I'm off to the Hamptons. An old friend of mine, a real billionaire, has a guest house. Unlike you, he actually owns his." She slid into the Escalade. "Goodbye, Arthur. Thanks for the jewelry. I'm keeping it." The door slammed, and the car pulled into traffic, leaving Arthur Vance completely and utterly alone on the sidewalk, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a name that was, as of an hour ago, completely worthless. He tried to call his friends, the men from the core club. He had to use a payphone, digging for quarters. Mark Frederick's secretary told him he was in a meeting. David Chen's line went straight to voicemail. None of them would ever take his call again. He was toxic. He was concrete. The sun was setting, casting long, cold shadows over the city. Arthur Vance, the lion of New York, the man who had bragged about his mistress's beauty, was now just a ghost, haunting the empire he never realized he didn't own. He started walking, with no destination, his $5,000 suit a hollow shell around a broken, terrified man. 3 months later, the cover of Forbes magazine was not graced by a charismatic man in a power suit. It featured a striking, powerful image of a woman. Ilara Hawthorne. She was not pictured in a boardroom or a glittering gala. She was standing in the server room of the core, her hand resting on a bank of supercomputers, her expression clear, focused, and in complete control. The headline was simple and devastating. The Quiet Titan, Ilara Hawthorne, the 100 billion woman who was hiding in plain sight. The article, which she had personally approved, laid out the entire story. It detailed how she, a child prodigy in computer science and quantitative analytics, had built the Helios algorithm that became the bedrock of Capital. It explained how she hired Arthur Vance, then a handsome, silver-tongued tech salesman, to be the face of her operation, allowing her to build her empire from the shadows. It was a masterstroke of PR. It reframed her 15 years of silence, not as weakness, but as a deliberate, strategic choice. The business world was electrified. Ilara Hawthorne was not just another billionaire. She was the architect. The Vance name was gone. The tower on Park Avenue was now the Hawthorne Building, its lobby refitted with cool, minimalist efficiency. The company, now operating openly as Hawthorne Strategic Solutions, was more profitable than ever. Ilara, now the public CEO, was ruthless in her efficiency. She had trimmed the fat, firing the executives Arthur had hired for their loyalty rather than their skill, and promoting the brilliant engineers and analysts, the concrete, that Arthur had always ignored. She was in a meeting in her new office, Arthur's old one, now gutted of its dark wood and replaced with glass and light, with Martin Shaw and her new executive team. They were planning a multi-billion-dollar push into green energy technology. "The old infrastructure is inefficient," Ilara said, pointing to a holographic map. Arthur was focused on Flash, on AI initiatives that just sounded good in a press release. "The real money, the real future, is in sustainable power. We're not just going to build a new skyline, we're going to power it." Her team listened, captivated. There was no bragging here, no empty charisma, just data, logic, and an iron will. She was not a lion or a visionary. She was a builder, and her new empire would be made of steel and light, built on a foundation of concrete and code. Miles away, in a cramped, windowless office in a shared workspace building in Queens, a man sat at a cheap desk, a plastic headset on. His hair was no longer perfectly coiffed. It was grey and thinning. His face was gaunt, the charismatic glow long gone, replaced by a dull, hunted look. "No, Mr. Peterson, I understand. I understand the fund is high risk," he said into the headset, his voice a reedy shadow of its former self. Arthur Vance was a cold caller for a third-rate penny stock firm. It was the only job he could get. His name was now synonymous with failure, a Wall Street punchline. The $4.8 million debt he owed to Hawthorne Solutions hung over him like a death sentence, ensuring he would never own anything again. His wages were garnished, leaving him just enough to live on in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment he shared with 2 other people. He finished his call. Another rejection. He rubbed his eyes, the cheap fluorescent lights giving him a migraine. On a small, flickering TV mounted in the corner of the office, a financial news program was playing. A cheer went up. Ilara Hawthorne, live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, was ringing the opening bell, celebrating the launch of her new green energy IPO. She was smiling, a small, genuine smile, as the confetti rained down. She looked powerful, vibrant, and, Arthur had to admit with a sickening lurch, beautiful. "Look at her," one of the other callers, a kid young enough to be his son, said. "That's the real deal. Built it all herself. They say her husband was some idiot who tried to steal it." Arthur didn't say anything. He just looked down at his shoes. They were scuffed. He had bought them for $60 at a discount store. He had been the design, the steel and glass facade. He had bragged about the fleeting beauty of his mistress, all while ignoring the true, enduring power of the woman who held it all. He thought she was the foundation, something to be buried and ignored. He finally understood. The foundation isn't the bottom, it's everything, and he was just the rubble that had been cleared away. Arthur learned the hard way that true value isn't in flashy beauty or boastful charisma, but in the quiet, unseen power that actually builds empires. He mistook the glittering facade for the foundation, and in his supreme arrogance, he tore down the only thing that was ever holding him up. Elara Hawthorne proved that the most brilliant minds often choose the shadows, not the spotlight, until the precise moment comes to claim what is rightfully theirs. What did you think of Arthur's spectacular downfall? Was Elara's justice cold and calculated, or was it the perfect response to his betrayal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of hidden power and karmic justice, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who loves a good twist, and most importantly, click subscribe and ring that notification bell. We have more dramatic, real-life stories coming your way every single week, and you don't want to miss what happens next.